Chapter 1. The last useful thing. Mike Bowers realized his life was over in a tone of voice. It wasn't his ex-wife's voice. Emily's had always carried a careful softness. Like everything she said was pre-approved by a committee Mike had never been invited to join. No, this voice belonged to one of his daughters. Bella, he thought, though it could have been Chloe. They had started sounding alike again once they stopped living in the same house as him. "Dad," she said, drawing the word out gently. "Mom thinks it might be uncomfortable." Mike held the phone away from his ear for a moment and stared at the far wall of his apartment. The wall was beige. All the walls were beige. He had chosen the apartment because it was cheap and close to work, and because it didn't pretend to be anything else. No accent walls. No aspirations. "Uncomfortable for who?" he asked, when he put the phone back. There was a pause, and during it he could hear movement. Papers rustling. A distant voice that might have been Emily's, or maybe someone else's. Another man's, perhaps. Mike no longer tried to identify those sounds. They were none of his business. "For everyone," Bella said. "You know, with Mom and the man she moved into my house," Mike finished. Another pause. Longer this time. "He's her fiancé now," Bella said. Mike smiled faintly. He had learned to smile at announcements like that. It helped keep his voice level. "Congratulations to them," he said. "So my presence at my daughter's graduation would make this engagement, what? Less festive." "Dad," she said. And the word carried weight now. Obligation pressed into it. "We didn't make this decision." Mike considered correcting her. He considered saying that she had, in fact, made a decision, two of them probably, since she and her sister tended to present these things as a united front. But he was tired. Not angry. Just tired in a way that felt structural. "It's fine," he said. "I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable." "That means a lot," Bella said, relief rushing into her voice. "We'll send pictures. I'm sure they'll be beautiful." When the call ended, Mike sat very still. He waited for something sharp to happen inside him. Didn't. That was how he knew. He had already lived through the sharp parts. The divorce papers that arrived without warning. The way Emily had explained it like a business decision already finalized. The months he spent noticing old memories rearranging themselves into evidence. The slow exile from his own life, conducted politely with paperwork. 17 years married. 2 children. A house he paid for and no longer lived in. Support payments timed like a metronome. Holidays negotiated like ceasefires. The man who moved into his house 2 years after the divorce had not bothered him as much as people assumed it would. By then, Mike understood his role. Provider. Former occupant. Historical footnote. He stood and walked into the kitchen, where the coffee maker gurgled through its final, exhausted cycle. He poured a mug he didn't really want and drank it anyway. Later that night, he sat at his small table and opened his laptop. He did not look at pictures. He did not reread old messages. He searched for apartments. Not nearby. He searched broadly, methodically, the way he did everything now. He avoided coastal cities and places with reputations. He wanted a town that had never heard of him and would not care to. He found one in the Midwest, a place small enough to have one main street and large enough to have a hospital and a grocery store that stayed open late. The rent was reasonable. The job market was steady. The winters looked like they required commitment. He closed the laptop and went to bed. Mike did not tell anyone he was leaving. There was no announcement, no farewell tour. He gave notice at work with the same tone he used to order lunch. He sold what little furniture he owned that wasn't necessary. He packed boxes carefully, not sentimentally. On his last morning in Florida, he stood in the empty apartment and felt nothing in particular. That, too, felt like confirmation. The drive north took 3 days. He listened to talk radio until the voices began to irritate him, then switched to music he barely remembered liking. He slept in clean, anonymous hotels and ate breakfasts that tasted the same everywhere. When he crossed into his new state, it was snowing lightly. The town announced itself with a modest sign and no slogan. Mike liked that. He drove slowly down the main road, noting a diner, a hardware store, a bookstore that looked stubbornly independent. The buildings were brick. The sidewalks were clean. His rental house was smaller than the one he had left behind, but it was entirely his. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of nothing being demanded. That night, he unpacked only what he needed. He made the bed. He cooked a simple dinner and ate it standing up. Before sleeping, he looked at his phone. 2 missed calls. 1 message. Bella again. Just checking in. Everything okay? Mike typed a reply, deleted it, and set the phone face down on the nightstand. When he woke the next morning, the snow had stopped. The world outside was quiet and unbothered by him. He made coffee. He drank it slowly. When he finished, he rinsed the mug and placed it upside down to dry. For the first time in years, there was nothing else he had to do. And that, Mike Bowers decided, would be enough for now. Chapter 2. The town that didn't care who he was. Mike's first week in town passed without ceremony, which he took as an encouraging sign. He woke early not because he had to, but because he always had. The habit had survived marriage, divorce, and relocation. It was stubborn like that. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the street wake up slowly. A man walked his dog past the house at exactly the same time every morning. A woman jogged by twice, once going one direction and, 10 minutes later, the other, as if to prove consistency mattered. No one waved. No one stared. Mike liked it. On Monday, he reported to his new job at the municipal utilities office. A beige building with functional lighting and a receptionist who greeted him without curiosity. His role was administrative, bordering on boring, which meant it involved systems that needed attention but no applause. He had spent most of his adult life being competent in the background. This was familiar terrain. His supervisor, a man named Tom with a trimmed beard and an expression permanently hovering between mild concern and lunch anticipation, shook Mike's hand and pointed him toward a desk. "You'll get access today," Tom said. "Take the manuals home if you want. Or don't. Most of it's common sense." Mike appreciated that Tom did not ask why he had moved, whether he was married or how he felt about winters. At lunch, Mike walked instead of eating at his desk. The town's main street was a modest stretch of brick storefronts and large windows that suggested transparency without trying too hard. He passed the diner he had noticed on his first drive-through, a bookstore with a handwritten sign advertising a reading group, and a cafe with a chalkboard out front that read, "Coffee. Food. No nonsense." He stopped walking. The cafe's windows were tall, letting in a pale afternoon sun. Inside, a woman stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, arguing amiably with a man who appeared to be attempting to pay with exact change and failing. "I'm not taking your penny jar," the woman said. Her voice carried easily through the glass. "That's not currency. That's a cry for help. It's legal tender," the man insisted. "So are buttons, technically," she said. "Doesn't mean I want them." Mike went inside. The cafe smelled like coffee and something baked recently. The space was small but deliberate, with mismatched tables that looked chosen rather than inherited. A bell chimed when he opened the door, and the woman glanced up. "Be right with you," she said, holding up a finger that suggested authority without aggression. The man with the coin sighed theatrically and surrendered a bill. As he left, he pointed at the woman. "One day, Sarah," he said, "you'll regret being this rigid." She smiled sweetly. "When that day comes, I'll accept your pennies." The man left. Mike stepped forward. "What can I get you?" Sarah asked. Mike scanned the menu. It was short. He appreciated that too. "Coffee," he said. "Black." She raised an eyebrow. "Bold choice." He shrugged. "I like to live dangerously." That earned him a small smile. Quick, like she hadn't meant to give it away. "Name?" she asked, reaching for a mug. "Mike." She wrote it on the cup without commentary. "You're new," she said, not looking up. "Is it that obvious?" She slid the mug toward him. "You're not looking for anything. Everyone else comes in already knowing what they want." Mike considered that. "Maybe I just don't expect much." She met his eyes then, and something in her expression shifted. Not sympathy, exactly. More like interest. "Well," she said, "that makes two of us." He took his coffee to a small table by the window and drank it slowly. It was good, strong without bitterness, like someone had paid attention. He watched the street and felt, unexpectedly, lighter. He returned the next day, and the day after that. By Friday, Sarah greeted him by name without checking the cup. "You're developing a routine," she said. "I hear that's a sign of settling in." "Or giving up," she countered. Mike smiled. "I've already given up. This is the good part." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair." Their conversations were brief but comfortable. They talked about inconsequential things, the weather, the merits of different coffee roasts, the inexplicable popularity of the diner's pie. She did not ask where he was from. He did not volunteer. On Saturday morning, Mike walked through the grocery store and realized no one knew him there either. It felt like starting over without having to pretend he'd improved. That afternoon, he unpacked the last box. It contained old paperwork he didn't need and a framed photo he had forgotten to throw away. He stared at it for a long moment. Emily between the girls at a beach years ago, all of them smiling into a future that had already made other plans. He set the frame face down in a drawer and closed it. That evening, he went to the cafe again, more out of habit than intention. It was quieter than usual. Sarah was wiping down tables. "Busy day?" he asked. She shrugged. "Busy enough." "You? Unremarkable. Those are my favorite kinds," she said. He lingered longer than usual, finishing his coffee even after it had gone cold. "You don't have to rush," she said, noticing. "We're not closing yet." "I'm not," he replied. "Just standing still." She leaned against the counter. "That can be dangerous." "So I've heard." They shared a look, one that acknowledged things without naming them. As he stood to leave, she said, "You should come by tomorrow morning. There's a farmer's market down the street. Brings in a crowd." Mike paused. He hadn't realized she was inviting him. "Maybe I will," he said. She smiled again, easier this time. "Good." Walking home, Mike realized something had changed. Not dramatically, not enough to scare him. But the town no longer felt temporary. And that, he suspected, might become a problem. Chapter 3 Rules for the rest of his life. Mike decided that rules were only useful if they were simple enough to remember and strict enough to prevent regret. He wrote them down on a yellow legal pad the first Sunday morning. He woke up in the new house without the faint panic of having forgotten something important. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a snowplow scraping a street that did not include him in its concerns. He sat at the small kitchen table, coffee steaming, pen uncapped. Rule 1, no marriage. He did not pause before writing it. He did not qualify it with again or probably. He had learned the cost of optimism. He had paid it monthly. Rule 2, no financial entanglements. This one came with an underline. He had spent decades confusing responsibility with obligation, generosity with expectation. He would not do that anymore. Rule 3, no rescuing. He leaned back after writing this, considering it. Emily had never asked to be rescued, not directly. But Mike had built his life around anticipating needs that were never acknowledged. He would not volunteer for that role again. Rule 4, no explaining himself. This felt important. He was tired of narrating his own existence so other people could decide whether it was acceptable. He set the pen down and looked at the list. It was neat, clear, defensive maybe, but earned. Seems reasonable, he said aloud, just to hear a voice in the room. He folded the paper and slid it into the drawer where he had put the old photograph. It felt appropriate to store the future next to the past, as long as they didn't touch. Mike's days settled into a rhythm that felt intentional without being rigid. Work during the week, walks after dinner, coffee at Sarah's café most mornings, though he resisted thinking of it that way. He told himself he liked the coffee. The fact that Sarah remembered his order was incidental. On Wednesday morning, he arrived to find the café louder than usual. The farmer's market had spilled people inside, and the line stretched nearly to the door. Sarah stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd given up on perfection before breakfast. "You look pleased," she said when he reached the counter. "I enjoy chaos from a safe distance," he replied. She handed him his coffee without asking. "You should try running a business. It's chaos with paperwork." "I've had enough paperwork for one lifetime." She studied him for a second. "You talk like someone who's escaped something." "More like paroled," he said, then immediately wondered why he'd said it. She smiled faintly. "Same. That should have been the end of it." Mike had no interest in shared confessions, even small ones. But the word lingered between them, unexamined and oddly comfortable. He took his coffee to the window and watched the crowd move past, people carrying canvas bags and conversations. The town felt busy in a way that suggested permanence rather than ambition. No one here seemed to be auditioning for a better life somewhere else. Later that week, Tom invited Mike to lunch. "Couple of us go to the diner on Fridays," Tom said, hovering near Mike's desk like he wasn't sure whether the invitation was an imposition. No pressure. Mike considered declining. Rule 4 flickered in his mind. No explaining himself. But declining would require an explanation too, or at least a justification. "Sure," he said. "I could eat." The diner was exactly what it promised to be. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, a server who called everyone Han. The conversation stayed safely on the surface. Weather, potholes, someone's nephew who might move back to town. No one asked Mike where his family was. He realized afterward that he had been braced for it, muscles tense against a question that never came. The absence of it felt like a gift. That night, he walked home under a sky so clear it looked deliberate. He thought about his daughters, not with longing exactly, but with the dull ache of something healed improperly. He wondered, briefly, whether they noticed his silence. Then he reminded himself that wondering was a habit he was trying to break. Saturday morning, he went to the cafe later than usual. Sarah was at a table with a laptop and a stack of papers, her coffee untouched. "You look like you're losing an argument," he said. She glanced up. "I am. With the tax code." "My condolences. Do you know anything about small business deductions?" "Only that they exist in theory." She closed the laptop. "That's about as far as I've gotten." He ordered his coffee and hesitated before taking it to his usual table. He gestured toward the chair across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She shrugged. "Only if you don't explain taxes to me." "I wouldn't dare." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Mike noticed she had a scar on her forearm, faint but visible. He did not ask about it. "So," she said eventually, "what brings you here?" The question was casual, but he felt it land. He had answers ready, safe ones. Work, change of scenery, weather-related dissatisfaction. He chose something else. "Nothing," he said. "That's kind of the point." She tilted her head. "You moved states for nothing?" "I moved states to stop being something," he corrected. She considered that, then nodded. "That makes sense." He blinked. "It does." "Sure. People move toward things all the time. Moving away takes more courage." He felt something tighten, then loosen, in his chest. He took a sip of coffee he didn't need. "And you?" he asked. "What are you running from?" She laughed softly. "I'm not. I ran already. This is where I landed." He waited. She did not elaborate. He respected that. As he stood to leave, she said, "There's a trivia night here on Thursdays. You should come." "That sounds dangerously social." "You don't have to talk to anyone," she said. "You can just sit there and judge." He smiled despite himself. "I do have strong opinions about useless facts." "Perfect," she said. "Bring them." Walking home, Mike felt the edges of his rules press against something new. Not threatening, just present. That night, he took the yellow pad out of the drawer and reread the list. The rules were still sound. He believed in them. But as he slid the paper back into place, he acknowledged something quietly, without judgment. Rules he was learning were only meant to protect what mattered. The trouble was, he wasn't entirely sure yet what that was. Chapter 4: A Woman Who Doesn't Want Anything. Mike arrived at trivia night 10 minutes early and immediately regretted it. The cafe looked different after dark. The windows reflected warm light instead of sky, and the chalkboard sign had been updated to read, "Trivia tonight. Think before you speak." Inside, tables had been rearranged into clusters, and a man with an enthusiastic posture was setting up a microphone he didn't need. Sarah stood behind the counter, watching him with the wary expression of someone who had agreed to something under protest and now intended to survive it. "You came," she said when she spotted Mike. He shrugged out of his coat. "You said I could judge silently." "That part's still true," she said. "The judging just might not stay silent." "I'll do my best," he said. "No promises." She handed him a coffee without asking and gestured toward a small table near the back. "You can sit there. It's neutral territory." "Neutral from what?" "People who take trivia personally." As if summoned by the comment, a group of 4 loudly confident men claimed the table nearest the host. One of them was already explaining the rules to the others, though the rules were printed on a sheet directly in front of them. Mike sat where Sarah had indicated and observed. He was good at that. Observation had once been his strongest contribution to a marriage, anticipating moods, needs, silences. It had not been enough then, but it still served him now. The host tapped the microphone. "Welcome, everyone, to Thursday night trivia," he said, voice booming unnecessarily. "Teams of up to 4. No phones. No yelling at me when you're wrong." A man at the loud table yelled something anyway. Sarah rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter beside Mike. "I apologize in advance." "For what?" "For the town," she said. "It means well." "I do too," Mike replied. "Still cause damage." She laughed quietly at that, then straightened. "You playing solo? Seems safer for everyone." "You could join a team," she said. "If you want." He considered it. Rule 3 whispered in his head, no rescuing. But joining a team wasn't rescuing. It was participating. "I'll sit this one out," he said. "First night." She nodded. "Suit yourself." The questions began. Mike answered them in his head without effort. Geography, history, literature. He didn't keep score, but he noticed when the loud table got something wrong and reacted as if personally betrayed by reality. During a break, Sarah slid into the chair across from him, bringing her own mug. "You're not bad at this," she said. "I'm not playing." You mouthed Timbuktu, with a lot of confidence. "Old habits," he said. She sipped her coffee. "You're hard to read, Mike." "That's intentional." "I know," she said. "I'm not trying to fix it." That caught his attention. "You're not." "No," she said simply. "I like people as they are. Saves time." He studied her then, really looked. There was no calculation in her expression. No expectation. She wasn't leaning forward, wasn't waiting for him to fill a silence. She was just there. "That's unusual," he said. "People say that," she replied. "Usually right before they decide they want something from me." "And what do you say then?" "That they should probably look elsewhere." Mike felt something shift, not dramatically, but enough to notice. A woman who didn't want anything was not part of his revised plan. He had assumed desire always came with an invoice. Trivia ended without incident, unless one counted the loud table accusing the host of bias. Sarah closed the register while Mike held the door for the last of the customers. "Walking home?" she asked, shrugging into her coat. "Yeah. Me too," she said. "Same direction." They stepped out into the cold together. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt intentional rather than empty. Snow crunched underfoot. "You ever miss it?" she asked, hands in her pockets. "Miss what?" "Where you came from," she said. "Who you were before you decided to be this." He considered the question carefully. "I miss parts of it," he said. "Mostly the parts one misunderstood at the time." She nodded. "That tracks." They walked in silence for a block. Mike noticed she didn't fill it. He appreciated that more than he wanted to admit. At the corner where they would part ways, she stopped. "Listen," she said. "I'm making dinner Sunday. Nothing fancy. You're welcome to come if you want." There it was. An invitation. He felt the familiar reflex to weigh it to anticipate cost. "I don't want to impose," he said. "You wouldn't be," she replied. "And you don't owe me anything if you say no." He believed her. That was the unsettling part. I'll come, he said. Her smile was immediate and unguarded. Good. Sunday evening. Sarah's house was exactly what Mike expected and nothing like what he feared. Modest. Clean. Lived in without being curated. Books on shelves that looked read, not displayed. Dinner was pasta and salad and bread she admitted she hadn't made herself. I know my limits, she said. I run a cafe. I don't need to prove anything. They ate at a small table, conversation flowing easily. She talked about the cafe, about choosing the town after leaving a job she'd hated. She did not mention an ex-husband or a dramatic backstory. You ever think about leaving? He asked. Sometimes, she said. Then I remember I'm not stuck. That helps. He nodded. It does. After dinner, they sat on the couch with mugs of tea. The space between them felt deliberate, not cautious, just respectful. You don't ask many questions, she observed. I found answers don't always help. She smiled. You're not wrong. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the door. Thank you for coming, she said. No pressure to make this a thing. I appreciate that, he said, and meant it more than he'd expected. As he walked home, Mike thought about his rules. No marriage. No entanglements. No rescuing. No explaining. Nothing in the evening had violated them. And yet, something had undeniably changed. For the first time since he'd arrived, Mike didn't feel like he was simply avoiding pain. He felt like he was choosing something, and that, he suspected, might be the more dangerous path. Chapter 5 Ghosts with Familiar Voices. The first message arrived on a Tuesday evening, just as Mike was finishing dinner. He noticed the phone light up on the counter and ignored it out of habit. That habit had formed years ago, when most messages brought expectations disguised as concern. He rinsed his plate, dried his hands, and only then glanced at the screen. Chloe. Dad. Can we talk? Mike stared at the name longer than necessary. Chloe had always been the one who softened conversations, who framed difficult things as requests rather than declarations. Ella took charge. Chloe smoothed the edges. He set the phone face down again. Rule 4 pressed forward in his mind. No explaining himself. He had not told his daughters he was moving. He had not announced a withdrawal from their lives. He had simply stopped participating in a system that had quietly decided it no longer required him as a person, only as a resource. Still, the message sat there, weighty despite its brevity. He did not respond that night. The next morning, snow fell in thick, unhurried flakes. Mike walked to the cafe instead of driving, enjoying the way the cold sharpened his senses. Inside, Sarah was behind the counter, focused, her brow furrowed as she worked the espresso machine like it had personally offended her. You look contemplative, she said when he reached the counter. Dangerous habit, he replied. She handed him his coffee and studied him. Something wrong. Something familiar, he said. Which might be worse. She didn't press. She never did. That was becoming one of the things he liked most about her. She offered space without distance. He sat at his usual table and watched the snow coat the street. The town looked insulated, cocooned against whatever storms happened elsewhere. At work, Mike found it harder to focus than usual. Numbers blurred. Emails went unanswered longer than they should have. At lunch, he walked without direction, letting the cold reset him. By the time he returned home that evening, there were 2 more messages. Chloe, Mom says you moved. Chloe, are you okay? Mike sighed, long and slow. Emily never missed an opportunity to control the narrative. He wondered how the news had been framed. Abrupt, irresponsible, probably tinged with concern that made her look generous. He sat on the edge of the couch and typed. I'm fine, he wrote. He stared at the screen, then added. I needed a change. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Chloe, why didn't you tell us? There it was. The question he had anticipated and avoided. Because telling you would have required pretending my absence mattered more than my presence ever did. He erased the thought before it could become words. I didn't think it was necessary, he typed instead. The dots vanished. Returned. Chloe, Bella's upset. Mike closed his eyes. I'm not doing this to upset anyone, he wrote carefully. I'm doing it for myself. The reply took longer this time. Chloe, we just don't understand. Mike looked around his living room. The simple furniture. The books he had chosen. The quiet that belonged to him. Understanding, he thought, was often overrated. You don't have to, he wrote. I'm not asking for anything. There was no response after that. He set the phone down and stood, restless. The sense of peace he'd cultivated here felt thinner suddenly, like ice under weight. Not broken, but tested. That night, he dreamed of his old house. Not the way it had been when they bought it, full of possibility, but the way it had looked near the end. Rooms half-used, conversations clipped, the quiet heavy with unspoken negotiations. He woke before dawn and did not try to go back to sleep. At the cafe later that morning, Sarah noticed immediately. You look like you lost an argument with yourself, she said. I might have, he admitted. She poured his coffee and gestured toward the counter. Sit. You're pacing. He sat. Past caught up? She asked. Yes, he said. And it brought friends. She nodded. That happens. He hesitated, then said, My daughters reached out. Her expression softened, but she didn't say what he expected. No, that must be hard, or you should talk to them. Instead, she asked, what do you want to do? The question startled him. That's not usually how that conversation goes. Most people ask what you should do, she said. I find that's less helpful. Mike considered it. He thought about his rules, about the life he was building here brick by brick. I don't want to be pulled back into something where my role is already defined, he said slowly. I don't want to be useful instead of wanted. Sarah nodded. That's fair. You don't think it's selfish? She smiled faintly. Selfish is taking without regard. This sounds more like choosing where you give. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That evening, Mike cooked dinner with more effort than usual, chopping vegetables carefully, focusing on the rhythm. Halfway through, his phone rang. This time, it was Emily. He stared at the screen until it stopped. She left a voicemail. He listened to it once, standing in the kitchen with the knife set safely aside. Mike, Emily said, voice calm, concerned, practiced. The girls are confused. They feel like you've shut them out. I know you've been going through a lot, but disappearing isn't the answer. We need to think about what's best for the family. Mike deleted the message without replaying it. The family, he thought. The word had become a lever. Later that night, Sarah texted him. Something casual about a new pastry she was testing, and whether he'd be willing to be a victim. He smiled at the screen. I accept this risk, he replied. As he set the phone down, Mike realized something important. The past would always have a voice. It would always know how to sound reasonable, how to press on old instincts and obligations. But here, now, he had something it had never offered him before. A choice. And for the first time, he was beginning to understand that choosing himself didn't mean rejecting everyone else. It meant refusing to be erased. Chapter 6, The Risk of Being Seen. Mike discovered that caring did not announce itself dramatically. It arrived quietly, like a change in whether you only noticed because your joints reacted before your eyes did. He found himself checking the cafe window for Sarah's light when he walked past at night. He adjusted his schedule so his lunch break aligned with her slower hours. He caught himself thinking she'd like this about things that had never interested him before. This irritated him. Caring implied risk. Risk implied loss. Mike had spent years turning those equations over until they were smooth and useless, like coins rubbed blank. On Thursday evening, he went to trivia again. This time, Sarah did not let him sit alone. You're with us tonight, she said, dragging a chair over without asking. Who's us? He asked. She gestured to two other people already seated, a woman with sharp glasses and a man who looked perpetually apologetic. Linda, Sarah said, pointing. Accountant. Ruthless. Linda nodded once. I don't suffer fools or incorrect answers. And this is Mark, Sarah continued. He knows a lot about sports but nothing about when to stop talking. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's fair. Mike sat. Participation, he reminded himself, was not entanglement. The game went well, better than he'd expected. Mike filled in gaps. Linda corrected him without malice. Mark provided energy that bordered on enthusiasm. Sarah watched the room with an expression that suggested she enjoyed orchestrating small compatibilities. They didn't win. They didn't embarrass themselves. Mike found that he didn't mind either outcome. Afterward, as they walked home together, Sarah said, You're good with people. Mike snorted. That's an exaggeration. You are, she insisted. You just don't linger. He considered that. Lingering creates expectations. Sometimes, she said. Other times it creates connection. They stopped at the same corner as before. This time, neither of them rushed to say goodbye. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. You can, Mike replied carefully. I might not answer. She smiled. Why do you keep an exit plan for everything? The question landed softly, but it landed true. I don't, he said automatically. Then he paused. I do. She waited. I spent a long time believing that if I made myself indispensable, I'd be secure, he said. Turns out that just made it easier to replace me. Sarah nodded slowly. That'll do it. So now, he continued, I don't stay anywhere I can't leave without consequences. She considered that. And me, he met her gaze. You haven't asked me to stay. No, she agreed. I haven't. That should have reassured him. Instead, it unsettled something deeper. The following week, Sarah didn't text him. It wasn't intentional. He knew that. The cafe was busier than usual. A delivery issue kept her late. Still, the absence registered. Mike found himself checking his phone, then resenting himself for doing it. He reminded himself that this, whatever it was, had no name, no obligations, no promises. That night, Emily called again. He didn't answer. Instead, he put on his coat and walked. The cold was sharp enough to clear his head. He passed the cafe, dark now, and slowed instinctively. The windows reflected his own face back at him, older, lined, steadier than he remembered. He stopped. Across the street, Sarah's door opened. She stepped out, scarf half-tied, keys in hand. She startled when she saw him. Mike, she said. Are you okay? I think so, he said honestly. You? Tired, she admitted. But fine. They stood there, the distance between them no longer comfortable or empty, just present. I didn't hear from you today, he said, then winced internally. It sounded like accusation, or need. She didn't take it that way. I'm sorry, she said. I should have said something. I didn't mean to disappear. The word struck him harder than he expected. I don't need explanations, he said quickly. I just noticed. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint crease between her eyebrows. Mike, she said gently. I'm not going anywhere, but I'm also not going to chase you if you're already halfway out the door. He laughed once, humorless. That obvious? Yes, she said. But I don't think it's because you don't care. That was the problem, he realized. He did. I don't know how to do this halfway, he said. I'm either all in or completely gone. Sarah studied him, then reached out and took his hand. The contact was warm, steady, unremarkable in the way that mattered most. Then don't do it halfway, she said. Just don't do it like it's a transaction either. He looked down at their joined hands. There was no urgency in her grip. No claim. I don't want to lose myself again, he said. She squeezed his hand once. You won't. Not here. Not with me. The certainty in her voice was not possessive. It was declarative. He believed her. And that scared him more than anything had in years. As they stood there, snow beginning to fall again, Mike understood the real risk he'd been avoiding. It wasn't loss. It was the possibility that someone might see him clearly, and choose him anyway. Chapter 7: The Offer He Doesn't Expect. Sarah told him on a Sunday afternoon that smelled like yeast and citrus. Mike had come in early, before the cafe opened to the public at her invitation. The lights were on but dimmed, the chairs still stacked on tables like they were holding their breath. Sarah moved between the counter and the prep table with a focus that suggested nerves disguised as productivity. You're pacing, Mike said. She stopped mid-step and looked at him. I know. He waited. Waiting had become something he was better at, less defensive, more attentive. I got an offer, she said. His first instinct was to brace. Offers usually came with fine print, expectations smuggled in as opportunity. What kind of offer? He asked. She took a breath. The city approved a small business development grant. It's for expanding locally. There's an empty storefront 2 blocks down. They want me to open a second location. Mike blinked. That's impressive. She smiled, quick and uncertain. It is. It's also terrifying. He nodded. That tracks. She leaned against the counter. It would mean more hours, more responsibility, more everything. I'd have to hire a manager for this place. Maybe step back from the counter. And you like the counter, he said. I do, she admitted. I like knowing people's orders. I like being needed, but not the way I used to be. The phrase caught his attention, but he didn't interrupt. There's more, she said. Of course there was. She gestured toward the back of the cafe, where a narrow hallway led to a door he hadn't noticed before. The building includes an apartment upstairs. It's small, but it's good. I could live there, be closer to both places. Mike felt the familiar tug, the instinct to calculate proximity, implication, overlap, and he prompted gently. And I'm taking it, she said. The words landed cleanly, decisive, not a question. He smiled genuinely. Congratulations. Relief flickered across her face, followed by something more cautious. There's something else, she said. I don't want you to feel like this is me, moving on without you, or dragging you into something you didn't ask for. I appreciate that, he said and meant it. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to move. I'm not asking you to help. I'm not asking you to change anything. The restraint in that sentence was unmistakable. It was an offer without leverage. But, she continued, if you want to be part of this, of me, there's room. On your terms. Mike looked around the cafe. He had come to know it as a constant, a place that felt like neutral ground. The idea of it changing stirred something uneasy in him. Not loss exactly, but awareness. I don't want to build my life around someone else's momentum again, he said carefully. She nodded. I don't want someone building their life around mine. They stood there. The space between them filled not with tension, but with mutual recognition. This was the difference, Mike realized. No one was asking him to be useful. No one was asking him to fund a dream that wasn't his. What do you want? He asked. She smiled, softer now. I want to grow. I want to stay here. I want to keep my independence. And I want you in my life, if that doesn't cost either of us ourselves. It was the most honest offer he'd ever been given. That night, Mike walked home alone. The air was cold but calm, the streetlights casting halos on the snow. He passed the cafe and imagined it quieter, run by someone else, its rhythms altered but intact. Change, he reminded himself, was not abandonment. At home, he took out the yellow legal pad again. The rules stared back at him, unrepentant. No marriage. No financial entanglements. No rescuing. No explaining himself. None of them forbade staying. He thought about his daughters, about the messages that had slowed, then stopped. He had not reached out again. Not yet. The distance still felt necessary, like a wound that needed air. He thought about Sarah, not as a solution, not as a replacement, but as a presence. Someone who did not need him to be smaller or larger than he was. He slept poorly, waking before dawn with the sense of standing at the edge of something that required a step, not a strategy. In the morning, he went to the cafe as usual. Sarah was there early, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled. She looked up when he entered, uncertainty flickering across her face before she masked it. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And a conversation." She poured his coffee and gestured toward the small table by the window. They sat. "I've been thinking," he said. "I figured," she replied. "I'm not ready to combine lives," he said. "I don't want shared assets or future plans that assume permanence before it's earned." She nodded. "I wouldn't accept those anyway." He smiled. "Good. I don't want to move," he continued. "Not right now. This place, this house, it matters to me." "I know," she said. "But I also don't want to pretend I'm unaffected by you," he said. "Or by what we're building, even if it's not defined yet." Her expression softened. "So here's what I can do," he said. "I can stay. I can show up. I can be honest when something scares me instead of leaving before it does. I won't promise forever. I will promise presence." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "That's more than enough," she said. The contact was familiar now, grounding rather than alarming. Later that week, Mike helped her move boxes, not because she asked, but because she accepted when he offered. He did not overextend. He did not stay late into the night fixing things that weren't broken. He went home when he was tired. On Friday, he received another message from Chloe. "I miss you," it read. "I don't know how to say this right, but I hope you're happy." Mike stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed back, "I'm learning how to be." It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't rejection. It was truth. That evening, he met Sarah for dinner at his place. They cooked together, clumsy and efficient in equal measure. They ate at the small table, knees brushing occasionally, conversation unforced. Afterward, as they washed dishes side by side, Sarah said, "You know, you don't have to prove anything to stay." "I know," he said. "That's why I am." For the first time in a long while, Mike felt aligned, not with an obligation or a role, but with a choice he could live inside without shrinking. The rest of his life did belong to him. And now, for the first time, he was choosing to share part of it. Not because he was needed, but because he wanted to. Chapter 8: What He Chooses to Carry. Mike did not plan to confront his past on a Thursday afternoon in late winter. It arrived anyway, disguised as a letter. He found it in the mailbox when he returned from work, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a notice from the utility company reminding him of a payment he had already scheduled. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting familiar enough to register before he consciously identified it. Emily had always written in careful cursive. Legible, polite, controlled. Mike stood on the porch for a moment, the cold pressing through his coat, and considered throwing the letter away unopened. He didn't owe it his attention. He didn't owe her anything. Instead, he went inside, set the mail on the kitchen counter, and made himself a cup of coffee. He did not rush. He did not dramatize the moment. When the coffee was ready, he sat at the table and opened the letter. "Mike, I don't know if this is the right way to reach you anymore, but I wanted to try." The opening line was familiar too. Emily had always framed her needs as attempts rather than decisions. She wrote about the girls, how graduation plans were moving forward, how complicated things had been emotionally. She wrote about concern. She wrote about confusion. She wrote about how his move had felt sudden, how it had hurt them, how she wished he had communicated more. She did not apologize. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "I hope we can talk, for the sake of the family." Mike folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The family, he thought again. The phrase had been doing a lot of work for a long time. That evening, he walked to the cafe. Sarah was behind the counter, sleeves rolled. Her attention split between the register and a delivery driver who appeared to be explaining something at unnecessary length. She caught Mike's eye and raised an eyebrow in a silent "help me." He smiled and took a seat at the counter, waiting. When the driver finally left, Sarah exhaled. "If I never hear the phrase company policy again, it'll be too soon." "Unlikely," Mike said. "Policies breed." She poured his coffee and slid it across. "You're quiet." "Processing," he replied. She nodded. "Want company or space?" The question still surprised him every time. "Company," he said. They sat in easy silence for a moment. Then he told her about the letter. Not reading it aloud, not dissecting it, just explaining its existence. "She wants to talk," he said. "For the sake of the family." Sarah snorted quietly. "That phrase usually means, on my terms." "That's been my experience," he said. "What do you want to do?" she asked. The question no longer startled him. It grounded him. "I think I need to answer," he said slowly. "Not to reopen anything, just to close it properly." She nodded. "That sounds healthy." "I'm not going back," he added. Not physically. Not emotionally. I didn't think you were, she said. That night, Mike sat at his kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. He did not respond impulsively. He did not draft and delete half a dozen versions. He wrote once carefully, "Emily, I got your letter. I understand that my move was unexpected. It was intentional." He paused, then continued. "I spent a long time trying to stay connected in ways that didn't require me to be present as a person. That no longer works for me." He wrote about the girls, not accusing, not sentimental. He told her he loved them, but that love did not obligate him to remain in a role that diminished him. "I'm open to limited communication that's honest and respectful. I'm not open to revisiting old arrangements or redefining my choices as abandonment." He signed his name without flourish. The next morning, he mailed the letter. He did not feel triumphant. He felt settled. A few days later, Chloe called. He let it ring twice before answering. "Hi," he said. "Hi, Dad," she replied. Her voice was tentative, stripped of performance. "I got your message," she said. "The one about learning how to be." "Okay. I think I understand more than I did," she continued. "I didn't realize how much you felt like you didn't matter." Mike closed his eyes briefly. "I mattered, just not in the ways that counted." "I don't want to lose you," she said. "I'm not gone," he replied. "I'm just not where you left me." They talked for 15 minutes. Not long. Not exhaustive. No apologies demanded. No roles renegotiated. When they hung up, Mike felt tired but not hollow. That weekend, Sarah invited him to see the new storefront. It was dusty and empty, full of possibility without obligation. She walked through it, gesturing, explaining her ideas without asking for validation. "I don't need you to fix anything," she said. "I just want you to see it." "I see it," he said. "It fits you." She smiled. "I thought so too." Later, as they stood in the middle of the bare room, Sarah turned to him. "You okay?" she asked. "You've been steady lately." He considered the word. "I think I've stopped carrying things that weren't mine." She reached for his hand. "Good." That night, back at his house, Mike opened the drawer where the photograph and the folded rules lived. He took out the picture first. He looked at it one last time, not with grief or nostalgia, but with clarity. It had been real. It had ended. Both things could be true. He placed it back in the drawer, face down. Then he unfolded the yellow paper. The rules were still sound. He didn't cross any out. He didn't amend them. He simply added one more line at the bottom. Rule 5. Stay where you are chosen as you are. He folded the paper and put it away. In the quiet that followed, Mike felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not relief, not happiness exactly, but alignment. His past no longer chased him. His present no longer felt provisional. The life he was living now didn't erase what came before. It just didn't owe it anything. Chapter 9, The Man Who Stayed. Spring arrived without asking permission. It announced itself in small ways. Snow retreating from the edges of sidewalks, the air losing its bite, the town exhaling as if it had been holding its breath all winter. Mike noticed it the way he noticed most things now, without urgency, without resistance. He stayed. The realization came to him one morning while he was making coffee, watching sunlight touch the kitchen counter at an angle it hadn't before. There was no dramatic decision, no line crossed, just the quiet understanding that he was no longer counting days or measuring exits. He stayed. Work continued in its steady, unremarkable way. Tom trusted him with more responsibility, not because Mike asked for it, but because competence was easy to recognize when it wasn't trying to impress. Mike left on time. He took his lunch breaks. He did not stay late to prove anything. At the cafe, changes were underway. Sarah hired a manager, Linda, temporarily ruthless and permanently effective, and stepped back from the counter more often than not. She didn't disappear. She adjusted. "You're hovering," Mike said one afternoon as she rearranged a display that didn't need rearranging. "I'm observing," she replied. "It's different." "Different isn't bad," he said. She smiled at him. "You'd know." They spent evenings together without ceremony. Sometimes at his place, sometimes at hers, sometimes walking the town until dusk settled into night. There were no declarations, no timelines, just presence, chosen, mutual, unforced. One Friday evening, Mike cooked. He had learned a few things beyond survival meals, mostly because he enjoyed the process. Sarah sat at the table with a glass of wine, reading something on her phone. "What are you smiling at?" he asked. She looked up. The city approved the signage for the new place. That was fast. "I know," she said. "I keep waiting for the catch." He plated the food and joined her. "Maybe there isn't one." She studied him. "You're getting optimistic." "Don't get used to it," he said. "I ration hope." They ate, talked about nothing urgent. After dinner, they washed dishes together, a choreography that felt practiced even though it wasn't. When they finished, Sarah leaned against the counter. "You ever think about what you'll say if someone asks you why you stayed?" she asked. Mike considered the question. "I don't think anyone's going to ask." She smiled. "Humor me." He thought about it. About the man he had been when he arrived, stripped down to essentials, determined to own nothing and no one. I stayed because my life fits here, he said. Not because it's perfect, because it's mine. She nodded. That's a good answer. It's the only one I trust. The call from Bella came in early May. Mike was sitting on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the street come alive. He recognized the number immediately. His chest tightened, not with dread, but with awareness. He answered. Hi, Dad, Bella said. Her voice was careful, but not distant. Hi, he replied. They talked about practical things at first. School finished. Jobs lined up. Plans uncertain. Then Bella cleared her throat. I heard you're doing okay, she said. I am, he replied. I'm glad, she said. And this time it didn't sound like obligation. I think I'm starting to understand why you left. He didn't correct her. He didn't need to. I'm not asking you to come back, she continued quickly. I just wanted you to know I don't think you abandoned us. Mike closed his eyes briefly. Thank you, he said. That means something. When the call ended, he sat quietly for a long time. The past didn't vanish. It didn't need to. It simply stopped insisting on ownership. That evening, Sarah found him thoughtful. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, he said. Everything's integrated. She laughed softly. That's a very you way to put it. A week later, the new cafe location opened without fanfare. No ribbon cutting. No speeches. Just doors unlocked and people curious enough to walk in. Mike stood off to the side, watching Sarah move through the space with calm authority. She wasn't performing. She was inhabiting. A woman approached him, gesturing toward Sarah. You must be proud. Mike smiled but shook his head. I'm not responsible. The woman looked confused. That's a compliment, he added. Later, as the crowd thinned, Sarah joined him. You didn't introduce yourself as anything, she said. Didn't need to, he replied. She took his hand. Not possessive. Not claiming. Just there. That night, back at his house, Mike opened the drawer one last time. He took out the folded paper, read the rules and smiled. They hadn't changed him. They'd protected him long enough to let him choose differently. He folded the paper and put it back. Outside, the town settled into evening. Lights came on. Doors closed. Somewhere down the street, laughter drifted through an open window. Mike sat on the porch and felt the rare, unremarkable satisfaction of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because anyone needed him to be there, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he had chosen to stay. For the first time in his adult life, Mike Bowers owed no one his happiness. And just as unexpectedly, he had found it anyway.